Hey gun people, I'm gonna talk about an AK. This is a one of those Draco micros. I'm kind of staining the grips. I had to sand them down. I didn't like the grips. They were kind of it was a big rounded thing right here. If you get these grips, so I put it on a sander, flattened this out a little bit, kind of thinned it out, made it to where the grip's a little bit less intrusive and a little smoother down here. So I just got finished putting a little stain over it, and I'm gonna put some poly on it, but that's what the grip's going to look like. But this is going to be about your trigger job. When you pull an AK trigger, and hopefully, see if I can get a light over here maybe at a different angle. Let's see if that helps. Does that get the light in there? I think that you're kind of seeing that pretty good. So if you get an angle here, this is your trigger, so I'm going to go ahead and pull off this. If you know anything about an AK, if you're doing a trigger job, you probably know enough about an AK. Recoil spring bolt, push forward, take the recoil spring out, and then you're going to pull your bolt back, take your bolt out. So when I'm doing a trigger job on my AKs, or I'm working on one of these, the things I'm looking for is I want to get right in between these little rails here with a little piece of sandpaper. And I just take a little piece of sandpaper in here, I put it in between here, and I really just kind of groove. Any grooves, I just went out and shot this, so it's kind of dirty. It's got some oil on it, so I got to clean it anyway. But I am just basically getting these grooves here. Any grooves, you can tell that it's been a little bit polished right there. It may look a little polished because I took some sandpaper there and I polished. All I'm doing is increasing the chance. If I fired this gun probably 20,000 times, all this polishing would be done naturally. But when I'm doing it, I usually shoot a few magazines, and then I look for places that look like it has a little bit of wearing, and then I just kind of finish off the wearing with a little sandpaper. But for the trigger job, which is what I'm going to talk about here, and I make these triggers that are pretty rough when I get them. They're pretty good by the time I get finished. So when you pull your finger on the trigger here, it's going to release this. So your hammer's going to come up and it hits your bolt and it fires the gun. So the part right here, in which most people will tell you, and they tell you where to do it when the thing's apart, I'm going to show you what is in here. If you look at a gun's trigger mechanism and see how it works, any parts that contact you want to be smooth. So when this comes back down, again, hopefully you can see this. When this comes down and it locks in, this little piece right here, it's got a little hook, and this is going to hook into that. I'm trying to keep my finger out of the way. And you can see that hooking in there. So I'm going to hold this down, and now it's locked in like a trigger reset, and when I let my finger off, that's going to slide. So those two parts right there need to be polished. Again, when you do a trigger reset, when you hear that click, that's what's happening. And so this right here, when I want a shorter reset, I just kind of shave that down a little bit to where it doesn't have to come back as far. You don't want to go too far because then it won't catch it. Because this happens pretty quick. When you fire your gun, it bangs back, and if you got the trigger back, it'll catch it. If the trigger isn't back, it'll let it go forward. So, and then when I pull the trigger, again, this piece right here, is what's catching. So it's that piece right there that looks kind of shiny. And if I get something smaller, I can point to it without my big old fat finger. So that piece right there is what's hooking onto your trigger. And this right here is what's catching it on the trigger reset. So those two things are important. So because this part right here pushes down on this part, I want to polish both those parts where they meet. So I polish across there. And because it runs along this area right here, I want to polish that. And because it catches underneath there, I want to polish that. And where it catches is right here on this part, so I want to polish that. And hopefully you can see all this. Again, my camera's, I can't really tell on there if I'm getting it all. So I'm polishing this part, I'm polishing this part, bottom and top, I'm polishing this part, bottom and top. My trigger mechanism, that's the part that's moving. That's the only part that's moving. So I want all the parts that contact this to be polished. And then, it's hard to hold that and keep it out of the way. So you can see that where it's catching. And again, I'm going to do a trigger reset, release the trigger. That's going to release. So those two parts right there should be really smooth that I just let go. Hold that down again and let it click. Again, when these two click and release, it catches right there. So that needs to be polished and that needs to be polished. And so those are the few things that I do. And I'll tell you, man, just polishing up those areas make a big difference on the AK triggers on how well they perform. And as I said, this is it's kind of dusty and dirty because I was sanding this down and I was putting it on, trying to see, you know, what it looks like, etc. And hopefully, I'm going to put one more coat of stain on there. I don't know if it'll get any darker, and then I'll put some poly on it. But anyway, that's a little bit on an AK job. You can tell I got some little stain right there I got to clean off because it's still wet. And we'll end that there on parts on an AK trigger job. Oh, also, I'll show one other thing on this. Every AK I pick up, I hate when I have to, my screen flipped on me. On the safety, it should be nice and soft. And there's a few ways to make this soft, but the most important way is on the inside here where this locks in. It gets a little, I don't know if you can tell right there. I can't see if the camera's picking it up or not. I'm going to point to it and zoom in. Right there in that area is where this is coming. See that part sliding? So this has been, when it was stamped in and it was really hard. So I filed that down and I polished it. And then I also polished in here where this met, because this is the part. So I had to get a little file in here and file this part right down on this piece down. I also polished this, and I polished the little divot. And that way it makes my my safety much more smoother and easier, to where it's not hard, it's not rubbing. These scratches are going to automatically happen, so I mean there's not much you can do about the scratches because it just rubs metal on metal. But you can make it a lot easier by adjusting those two pieces right in here, and then this. The other thing that people do for the easy switch is they just take this and bend this out. So they bend it toward here. So I grab it and I bend it this way just a little bit, and then sometimes that will tweak it and make it easier. So that's an easy fix, but if you really polish inside here, that'll get you a nice smooth safety quicker. So that's your trigger job, and you're loosening up your safety there. All right, hope that helps. And that is a micro Draco. It's not the mini. The mini's a little bit longer. This one's shorter, 6-inch barrel, I think.